Hello and welcome to this setup guide for Heroes Mod Magic 2, the Succession Wars, and the Price of Loyalty. In this guide I will explain the various versions of the game and how to get the best playing experience for the game at this point in time. First, a bit of version history. Heroes Mod Magic 2, the Succession Wars, the second installment in the highly popular Heroes Mod Magic franchise by New World Computing, was released in 1996 for both DOS and Windows 95. As far as I know, both versions are identical. Probably the Windows version, when windowed, includes the top menu that allows accessing settings in an alternative way, but it's not very important. As far as I know, there are no other changes between the versions. If I'm wrong, feel free to correct me and I'll add the corrections to the description of the video. If you have watched the Heroes of Mod Magic 1, a strategic quest setup guide, you might remember that the main difference between the versions was audio quality. Well, in this game, that is no longer the case. The DOS version of the game can in fact play back Red Book CD audio now, and it works fine through DOSBox. The Windows version also runs better, but it still has compatibility problems with the sound in both new versions of Windows and in Wine, and as such there is little reason to use the Windows version rather than the DOS version. It sounds great, just run the DOS version, right? Well, actually, there are still some problems with the music, and they get real confusing real fast. See, in 1997, New World Computing released an expansion pack to the game called The Price of Loyalty. It was generally the same as the base game, just with more campaigns and objects, but for some reason the expansion disc included a different set of music tracks. Maybe the composers had a few spare tracks they wanted to show off. Well, in any case, this is where things get complicated. If you open the game, any version, you'll see that there are in fact three options for the music: MIDI music, Red Book CD audio music, and Red Book CD audio with opera. Well, the last two options are really the same. The middle option simply disables playing the town themes, probably because the developers were afraid that opera music in a video game was too radical of an idea for the time. The only thing that this option serves, really, is to confuse you as to why the town themes are not playing as they should. So, just pretend it doesn't exist. The MIDI audio option is in fact not quite MIDI. To be more precise, it is XMI, something in between MIDI and module or tracker music. It is a superset of MIDI, where the files could be made to be read by regular MIDI programs, and contains notes, instrument numbers and times, but it can also optionally contain a sound bank for said instruments, so the music sounds the same for any sound card that has the hardware to play back music of such format. While that's nice, this feature wasn't actually used in the game, and also many of the game's tracks are opera music, which one cannot remake in MIDI to begin with. So the MIDI music was only used as a fallback. Mind you, it's still nice to know the notes of the music for the musicians out there, yet it's not that relevant to getting the most out of the game. Unfortunately, throughout the releases, the MIDI tracks were even more of a mess than CD audio tracks. In the original final release, several of the MIDI tracks were duplicates of one another, some were missing entirely, causing the game to continue playing the last play track in an otherwise inappropriate location, and the rest were assigned seemingly haphazardly and completely mixed up. If people did not realize that they did not have CD audio on, they would hear quite different tracks than those who use CD audio, making everyone confused in the process. A very common point of confusion, for instance, is which track is supposed to be the Night Town and which is supposed to be the Wizard Town track, since in the MIDI files the two are swapped. The Price of Loyalty release fixed the MIDI town theme mix-up problems, but there were still omissions and duplicates. So in any case, you should really just ignore the MIDI track assignments and use the CD tracks as the reference instead. In late 1997, New World Computing released the Heroes of Might and Magic Compendium, a combination of Heroes of Might and Magic 1, Heroes of Might and Magic 2 The Succession Wars, and The Price of Loyalty. The disc included tracks from the Price of Loyalty release. Next, in 1998, New World Computing released Heroes of Might and Magic 2 Gold, a compilation of the Succession Wars and Price of Loyalty on one CD, seemingly based on the compendium. It was a Windows-only release, and the CD had the Succession Wars tracks. The MIDI files got sorted to match the CD audio, but still had duplicates. In later compilations, Heroes of Might and Magic 2 Gold was included without modifications, with one notable exception: Heroes of Might and Magic Millennium Edition. That release was quite quirky, because even the developers themselves said they had no idea what happened with the audio tracks in the Millennium CD. While the Terran themes were correct, the town themes used a really funky mix between Price of Loyalty tracks, Heroes of Might and Magic 3 tracks, and the Sorceress Town track was replaced by something else entirely. The composers for the game say that the Sorceress track was probably an unused Sand Terran theme that was misapplied, and yet it's a bit enough to be a town theme, perhaps Barbarian. It's weird. Then, the Knight, Necromancer, and Wizard Town themes were replaced with their Heroes of Might and Magic 3 equivalents. And hilariously enough, these tracks are in regular Redbook CD audio quality. That means they are of higher quality than those that Heroes of Might and Magic 3 itself shipped with. That is really crazy. Basically, you have the gold master of those tracks put in an entirely unrelated CD. And the quality difference is in fact quite noticeable, especially when it comes to the chimes in the Tower Town track. So those are the original releases. There were also ports to RISC-OS, of all things, of both the Succession Wars and Price of Loyalty, and a macOS port of the Succession Wars only, but they're generally not very interesting nowadays. Then, in recent years, there have been two additional noteworthy developments. One is the fact that the game was repackaged by GOG.com, which is the easiest way to buy the game nowadays. The GOG version is the Heroes of Might and Magic 2 Gold DOS version, with the Succession Wars tracks in OGG format, mounted by DOSBox as a virtual Redbook audio CD. That's a pretty neat solution, because one can just drop in their own music tracks into it to have different tracks play. The GOG release also includes the Price of Loyalty soundtrack as a separate download, which you can then use instead of the default The Succession Wars music if you like. There are two problems with the GOG release, however. One small and one large. The small problem is that the music tracks are numbered starting from 1, whereas the CD tracks were numbered starting from 2. The technical details of that is that in Redbook Audio CD, track 1 is not music, but regular files on the CD. So the numbering here serves to make even more confusion. And the large problem? Well, it turns out that GOG used a disk image taken from a scratch disk for the audio, and it includes some really annoying popping sounds. That is quite unfortunate. Thus, finding actual good quality music files these days is a bit of a challenge to begin with. I have those, and I rip them, record them to high quality OGG Vorbis, and replace the files shipped by GOG with them. So during my LP and in my uploaded tracks, this problem will not be present, but others may not be so lucky. The other major development in this field is the F-Heroes 2 project. That is the free and open source software re-implementation of the Heroes of Might and Magic 2 engine, and runs natively on both new Windows versions as well as on Linux. It's a direct counterpart to the VCMI project for Heroes of Might and Magic 3. In its current state, it allows using arbitrary resolution sizes, and has a plethora of nice tweaks one can enable, with many of them being backported features from Heroes of Might and Magic 3. They're all configurable too, so you may also not use any of the tweaks and play essentially vanilla, just with higher resolutions. F-Heroes 2 is pretty fantastic and would generally be a go-to solution for anyone wanting to play the game. But unfortunately it also has 3 problems, 2 small and 1 big. The first small problem is that it doesn't help to solve the audio confusion problems. It also expects numbered OGG files, like the GOG release, but the town track numbers are all mixed up, again! Thankfully it's just a matter of renaming tracks to get it done right, but it's just another layer of confusion about which track is supposed to play where. The second small problem is that the animation speed in F-Heroes 2 seems to be erratic. Sometimes when it's set to the lowest possible speed, the game is still way fast. But other times not. It's weird. The last problem, and the big one, is that F-Heroes 2 does not support the single-player campaigns yet, which is unfortunately a deal-breaker for my upcoming LP of this game. But I have done a stream of F-Heroes 2, so if you're curious about it, you can take a look at that. So that's all the versions of this game there are so far. Are you already confused as to which tracks are in what release? To be honest, one needs a spreadsheet just to track them, which I did make to help you all out. You can find a link to it in the description of the video. It might not even be entirely accurate. If you want to make changes to it, ask and I will give you edit access to the document. But to recap, F-Heroes 2 is the best version of the game if you don't need the single-player campaigns. The DOS version that you can find on GOG.com is fine if you need the SP campaign. Ignore everything that's not CD audio with Opera. And if you want perfection, try to find higher quality tracks and simply replace the ones GOG ships. In my upcoming LP, I will be using the Humble Bundle version of the game, which is pretty much just the GOG version of it, through DOSBox, with customized tracks. During the Succession Wars campaigns, I will use the stock The Succession Wars tracks. During the Price of Loyalty campaigns, I will use a mix of Price of Loyalty and Millennium Edition tracks. The Price of Loyalty town themes and the Sand theme replaced by the unique track in Millennium Edition. The DOSBox settings through the DOSBox game launcher you can see on the screen. And that's it for this guide. This might be the last or next to last setup guide for Might and Magic series games, because newer games thankfully work fine in new Windows versions as well as in Wine. So, see you all in my playthrough of Heroes of Might and Magic 2, The Succession Wars, and Price of Loyalty. Later.